Hey, Power Athlete Nation.
John, what's happening?
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Power Athlete Radio.
Keep going. Great intro.
Is that intro good? Or is it a little subdued?
You've got more panache than you had last episode.
Oh, you think more panache than last episode? I thought I was panacheful.
I love how you make up words. You had a couple intros. We'll get to interviews in a second. Intros last episode because you threw out your Philly sports radio jock.
I think you got to be in the mood for that type of stuff. I think just coming on, I really appreciate kind of, big time podcasts that just start talking kind of like we do.
Uh-huh.
I mean, should we go to like a pre-recorded intro?
Well, we kind of have that. Callie introduces us.
Isn't it Callie just lambasting us?
Yeah. Which is fine.
Yeah.
And depending on the guest, sometimes she burns the guest, unless they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, well, story checks out. So we are doing a Q&A for our hotline. For those of you guys that are not familiar, we have this thing called the Power Athlete Hotline, and you can find it at 929-464-464.
0.
929-ING-ING.
0.
Yep. So you can call up the hotline, leave us a message, and we will answer your questions, maybe, if they're good. If they suck, we're just going to listen to them and laugh. But if they're good and it's something that we can put on with a little shtick, to quote McQuilkin, but if we can come on and it's good content and we can use it, we're going to rap about it. So
yeah, and we also encourage you to leave reviews on iTunes or your podcast listening platform and try to be funny. I think you are funnier than us.
If you leave a 5-star review, we will read the funniest one. We wrote one last episode where obviously the guy wasn't digging on my intros, but you know what that means? More intros. Whatever, like when you say, hey, I don't want to eat any more of this, what are we going to do? We're going to keep making it.
Yeah, don't tell us we suck at something because then we're just going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
But then I guess that's how we get better.
I think you get better just through having the opportunity of doing the intros.
And then before you know it, we don't suck. But we're going back in time to lead off this show.
Yeah, well, what I've asked Chris to do is I asked him to go back in time and find Power Athlete Radio's first review, 2014.
Let's see, 2013,
Ooh,
October 2013. Here we go.
Bring it. Bring the action.
Powerfully distracting. 3 stars. Guys, the audio is the only negative. Not only does it kind of echo, but everyone tends to talk over one another because they aren't in the same room and see when the other person is finished talking. From a listener's standpoint, this is distracting. All else, solid.
Well, what he forgets was we were in a small office in Costa Mesa, California. We had one mic. We were sitting around with some just Skull Candy headphones that we'd get given for free. We were trying to Zoom people in. Some people called in, and there was a delay. So a lot of times where we were talking over each other, it was because the delay was recording in kind of a weird way where we thought we were being concurrent in the conversation, but it just sounded off. And then we would just put it out. Like there was no editing, nothing. It just went straight out. And then it was finally when Callie was like, hey, I listen to podcasts. And we're like, really? Because at that point, I'd never listened to a podcast. And she's like, I listen to podcasts, and this is dog shit. Let me help. And so then Callie's job became to edit and clean up the podcast.
And she's done a fantastic job because this review came in 3 months later. It's like a punch to the face. 5 stars. Tons of applicable information, knowledgeable guests, and witty banter make this an awesome podcast. January 2014.
Wow. So we've been doing it since January of 2014.
We've been 5-star worthy since then. Before then.
Well, we've always been 5-star worthy. I just think that our Achilles heel was the technology aspect. It took a while for us.
But 2013 podcast, everybody sucked.
Yeah, and especially with Luke digging in the trash trying to find a mix board and Craigslist, there was no hey, let's go down to Stereo City and actually get a real setup.
Speaker City.
I'm worth $3.5 million the government knows about. So our setup was so ghetto. It was pretty rough.
Well, now we're here in this beautiful studio.
Yeah, Power Athlete Studio.
With some, you're very well lit, John.
We have added a few more lighting. I mean, the thing is these things are going to go on YouTube, and we're going to start pushing these things out in terms of content on YouTube. And I think what it is, we got to have not only a cool backdrop, which, we've added some stuff. There's the first buck that I ever shot on this property, and my good friend Johnny Cash, helping me along with his one finger salute and some of the other stuff. So it's looking good in here. I got some other stuff on my ad. I'm going to clean this up a little bit.
Would you say this room, if somebody tunes in to YouTube, Power Athlete Radio for the first time, leaves a good impression?
I like to think so. I mean, they're probably thinking, I wonder where those guys are at.
Texas, Austin.
Austin,
anyway,
Texas.
That leads into our question. Our hotline wasn't too hot, but our discussions during training were, and we knew this would make a very powerful podcast for many of you out there. And we're going to get into first impressions. John Welbourn was kind enough to drop some knowledge on Nate Dogg and I during training about first impressions. And there are some one-liner gems in there that would make John Wooden jealous.
Yeah, my dad was, as you know, my dad passed away 3 years ago on February 28th. And not only was my dad, super smart, just really impactful in my life. If you guys have listened to the podcast at all, you've heard me mention him. But he was always good for dropping little bits of knowledge, but never in like a positive, constructive way. There was never like, hey, here's something for a learning opportunity. I'm going to give you some advice. It's going to help you in life. It was always done very backhanded and almost kind of mean-spirited. And I told him a story once. I remember it was after I retired from the NFL, we were getting to go to an event, and I had slimmed down a bunch. I didn't have to be 300 plus pounds, and I threw this suit on, and it was way too big. And I was like kind of freaking out a little bit. And I'm like, Dad, what do you think? You think I could wear it? And he's like, it's better to not show up than show up in an ill-fitting suit and have people remember you that you look like an idiot. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm either not going or I'm going to find something else to wear. And just growing up when we were kids, my dad was a criminal defense attorney, and we always went to a lot of events. I remember even as a young kid, he's like, hey, you don't want people to think you're stupid. So go over, look somebody in the eye, shake somebody's hand. And I remember shook my dad's hand as a little kid and was like, make sure you look people in the eye and, say your name and repeat their name. Like, nice to meet you, John Welbourn. What was your name? And then they say it, then you say it back to them. That way you say your name, you hear them say you, because he's like, if you don't, you're going to forget their name. And if you don't say your name, they're going to forget it. And then it's going to be a lost interaction. So look them in the eye and they'll remember you. And so having a firm handshake, looking somebody in the eye, introducing yourself, there was a lot of things on that idea of first impressions. And I remember years later kind of asking him about it. And he's like, a lot of that stuff is for you, but a lot of it is reflective on your parents. And he goes, you'll see as you get older when you'll meet kids that are, understand, shaking your hand, looking in the eye, manners, know how to hold a conversation. All you're going to think of is, oh, their parents did a good job. These kids were raised well. And, before I had kids, there was no way for me to understand that. But now, now that I have kids and, we go to kid parties and you meet parents and you'll meet the kid, you meet the parents, and you're like, oh, this kind of makes a lot of sense now. But I think that part, and I even tell my own kids, I'm like, you have to remember good manners and making a good impression and treating people well and being helpful and all these things reflect upon you, but ultimately reflect upon us as a parent. Because if you go out and act like an asshole, all they're going to think is that your parents did a poor job of raising you, and that's not the case. I find myself not using the same tone and really the way the delivery of my dad, because
you gotta wait till they're older, right?
Yeah, well, but my dad was like that my entire life. There were things, and I'm not going to say some of the stuff on the podcast, but he would say things, and we were kind of taken back because it was, he was very to the point, and it was very condescending. You guys, I joke with you guys all the time. You're whenever we start kind of making fun of each other or ripping, they're like, dude, why do you get so vicious so quick? I'm like, you guys didn't grow up with a really smart, condescending father the way I did. And because of that, I was always very well prepared for not only a battle of wits, but if somebody wants to get into a verbal confrontation, I'm much more skilled in a in this kind of, situation, like sitting across from somebody, I'm decent within writing. I really don't interact and try to battle people on the internet because you're never going to convince anybody. Like, it was funny. I posted a picture of the new farm truck I picked up, that 1964. Mark Ripto gave us that sticker that said "Secede" on the back. And so I threw it on there as kind of a joke, and I posted a picture on it. And some dude left a fucking snarky comment being like, you need to rethink this. And I was like, I'm not looking for your counsel. And who the fuck are you? Like, it was funny. And he's like, is this your first day on the internet? I'm like, no, it's not. But I also see people post things on social media. And if I don't agree with them or I don't really like them, I don't even leave a comment. I just scroll past it and don't give it second thought. I wouldn't even waste my time to really comment on something.
Do you fear now the internet is setting back from the value of that first impression?
Well, what I'm amazed by,
or the skill of a first impression?
Man, I don't know if the first impression on the internet is as valuable, because think about how many people we've met virtually, right, through through podcasts and whatever. Even people we've had interacted with through Zoom and like this podcast. And then we've met them in person and had such a rich experience. Mm-hmm. The experiences I've had, let's talk about Derek Woodsky or Bert Soren or Matt Vincent or any of the guys. I met these guys through different mediums, and then as we sat in person, then you realize that connection. So I think that there is a lack of connection through the internet and also through these situations. It's for the same reason that Joe Rogan does all his podcasts in person. That personal connection of sitting with somebody and, mannerisms and seeing the face and, hearing the sighs and, being able to read somebody is so important. Whereas, a two-dimensional screen doesn't allow you to see much of that.
No. Did Bob Welbourn ever speak of body language or posture?
Yeah. Big thing was, no slouching. So my dad, was real big on you're going to be tall, so stand up straight. So what happens when guys are tall, they tend to slouch.
Yeah, and females as well, because they sprout early.
Yeah, and then they start rolling shoulder and they try to shorten themselves. My dad was like, be proud of being tall, stand up, look down on people. He's like, now don't look down your nose at them, but so a lot of times, and even if somebody's short, this is kind of funny, instead of me tipping my head, what I'll do is actually just kind of spread my stance and kind of shorten that way. So I always kind of stand up straight.
Oh, okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Well, but what was nice about playing in the NFL was that the majority of my friends were all pretty tall. So you end up kind of standing around tall people all the time. But I know I've been around a lot of tall people and they tend to slouch. So having good posture was always important. When I was a kid, I remember I had to be 5, 6, 7 years old. My dad gave me this book called Manly Manners. And it was a 1950s manners book. And I had to read this stupid book about this kid. And he goes through all this stuff. And it was just kind of impactful. And I was like, Dad, is this stuff still applicable? And I remember having a conversation with him years later. And he's like, it's more applicable today than it was then, because parents were so much more engaged with their children. And I was like, I don't buy that. And, wow. He was like, well,
I found it on Amazon, John.
Oh, did you? What year did it come out?
1940, January 1st, 1940.
So
Ruth Crowther.
Yeah.
And when I say Amazon, it's only antiques are for sale.
Yeah,
so
no, it's
big money.
Yeah, it's an old book, man, and I remember having to read that. But it's the same stuff I tell my kids. But I have daughters, and I have a son. But for my kids, and it's different. I grew up with 3 boys, so I think that maybe there was a certain, I don't know, maybe the time, but a little bit more gruff, a little more coarse. Whereas I think with my daughters, there's a big thing. I talk about if somebody being helpful, helping your mom. Like yesterday, I've been teaching my daughter to cook. So she starts with the vegetables. So I cooked, we did ribs, and I did some pork chops for them. And she had to cook cauliflower and broccoli. So we're over there taking her through, and I'm like, you start with the vegetables. That's where I started. I started on vegetables. My job was to cut everything, and I did all the vegetables, and then I ended up working my way up into the protein courses. And that evolution of cooking, and it was funny. I talked to my mom yesterday, and she's asked me, she's like, do the girls make dinner? I was like, no. She's like, they're 9 years old. They should be able to make dinner. And I asked my mom, I'm like, how old were you when you first remembered making dinner? And she's like, I helped my mom. And I did too. From the time I was 3 and 4 years old, like I helped my mom. I was like her little sous chef. But and I remember my mom telling me, you have to learn to cook because girls will not know how to cook and you're going to starve. So that was like a huge thing she always said to us. But
Doris Welbourn one-liners, that's a whole different podcast.
Oh, fuck, dude. That's we could just bring her on. The problem is that she would not be honest enough. She'd just sit here and be like, who are these people listening to this and why are you going to tell them this stuff? But so she called me yesterday and she's like, do the girls know how to cook? Like they should know how to cook. They should know how to do this. They should be able to bake. And she's like, the fact that you're, you and your wife are pretty capable and it's just easier for you to do it isn't teaching them anything. So like a lot of times with stuff like, don't worry, I'll just do it. It's faster. But the problem is that's not educating them. I think I've told the story before when my dad was sick. He was going through some chemo, or he went through his chemo for cancer. I took him to an appointment. I had like 2 hours to kill while he was in there getting, poison pumped into him. And there was a movie theater, and I went across the street, and like the only movie playing was Black Panther. So I roll in there and I'm watching, trying to take a few minutes to kind of get my mind off of this like awful thing that my dad's going through. And like there's the scene in there when he like goes back to like the kind of the spirit world deal, and he makes the comment like, the job of the father is to prepare the child from the day the father is not there. And so like I like heard that and it was pretty impactful. And I started thinking back on like all the things that my dad had taught me and like all the successes and the failures and like every conversation we had from, me calling him on the phone. I remember I had to write a rhetoric paper on fear. We had to pick an emotion. I picked fear. And at the time I was taking Ken Jowett's class on he was a political science guy. He was one of Reagan's advisors to Russia. And I went, and as I was talking about this paper I was going to write with my dad, he made a great point. He's like, you should go to Ken Jowett's office hours, talk to him, and ask him for something that had to do with fear, like something in the American, within America. And you could actually probably write one paper and use it twice. And I was like, that's a great idea. So I had this fear paper I was writing for rhetoric. I went and I talked to Ken Jowett, and he was like, the greatest fear in recent history is McCarthyism. So I wrote a pretty decent paper on like Joseph McCarthy and McCarthyism and the Red Scare based on fear with the rhetoric, and actually used it, turned it in for Ken Jowett's class and used it in my rhetoric class. So I got 2 for 1 on that. And, and like that was, having a very, very smart, intelligent dad who was, current on all this stuff. It was good. But yeah, that idea of like, put in a good impression, have people remember you because it's important. And sure enough, he was, not only very receptive receptive to it, but like that was a good impression. So, no, my dad was always very good on like coaching us for, not only how to be a man, but, how to interact with people, like how to tie a tie, how to dress well. I mean, at my dad's funeral, as I got to like meet a bunch of like his friends and people who had known him for years, everybody at the same time, like, dude, your dad was always so impeccably dressed. Like he never came in. His suits were always so, expensive, nice suits, had the best ties, always carried a really nice briefcase. Oh, his Porsche was always clean, always drove a black Porsche. So, it just was amazing. And like, you're like, I remember as a kid, my dad showing me how to shine shoes. So like he had a shoe box and like clean them up and I had to shine shoes and, he'd like make me, hey, I need you to shine these. And I would do it not because I wanted to, but because he asked me. But also years later, like knowing how to do these things, it wasn't just that I was shining his shoes. He was teaching me something. And if I were to ask people, be like, oh, do you know how to shine shoes? Oh no, your dad didn't teach you to do that? Oh, okay. Well, maybe your dad didn't have a job where he had to wear nice shoes every day, or he just went and had somebody else. But it's like ironing a shirt. Do you know how to iron a shirt? Like a collar shirt? Time. Yeah, I know how to iron a shirt. I watched my dad iron shirts, and I used to iron shirts for him and how much starch to use and all that because he didn't take all of his shirts to the dry cleaners. So all these little skills, which are probably called old-fashioned, are just, things that you learn from your parents just for like the same right. Like I had to go cut a bunch of trees down. And I'm yelling at my kids to get out there and come help. Not that they wanted to, but at some point, like these are things that they might have to do themselves.
Mm-hmm. And because imagine going into a courtroom and like posturing up and owning that room. Did he ever give you any advice, or was it more of a representation of how to stand and deliver and be memorable?
I think part of that is dressing well. Like, don't dress like an asshole, which is something he used to tell me all the time. He used to get pissed at me when we would travel, and he's like, "What? You have money. Why aren't you going and getting nice suits made?" And I was like, Dad, I'm sitting on an airplane. Like, the only time we wear the suit is like walking in. He's like, yeah, but think about how many times you see somebody get off the bus and they walk into the stadium. And he's like, for that, 2 or 3 seconds when you see people wearing these outfits, he's like, it's impactful. And so I think like maybe part of my rebellion was kind of dressing like an asshole for a lot of years. But then you get to the point where you're like, it's all right. I'll just go get a couple suits made. And, how you wear them, like how I like my suits, the colors, how to match your shoes, all that. Like, this is all stuff that I learned from him, and, but I think that stuff's important. And unfortunately, I don't know who teaches you that. I mean, I guess you could get on Instagram and you could probably look it up, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of this stuff is really, things that are taught to you along the way, as long as you're receptive.
And yeah, that's solid messaging. My next question for you, and you've been providing a lot of interviews for folks. What advice would you give people to make an impression for, say, a job interview, to be memorable, but not only be memorable, I mean, rise above the rest?
I know for at least for me, things, and like I don't know, like first impressions, for example, like if somebody comes and trains with us, like, can you jump into the group? Do you understand the social dynamics? Have you lifted weights? Are you a complete beginner? Are you going to hurt yourself? Like, do you understand your limitations? I think it just shows competence. To be able to come in and, shake somebody's hand, look them in the eye, be like, hey, what are we doing today? Great. I'm training at your place. Let's go. So I think there's, great confidence in that. But I think when you walk into a job interview, one is, look the part. That was a big part in the NFL, and I always kind of joke about it. I always wanted, when people saw me, be like, oh, you play in the NFL? Well, that makes sense. Like, that was a big thing. Whereas a lot of times I'd be like, you play in the NFL? God, this guy looks like he drives a beer truck. So like that idea of like, look the part, are you dressed well? Do you come in, what does your resume look like? Is it done well? Do you have a coffee stain on it? Do you come in, you shake your hand, have you put together a little elevator speech, a little bit of canned speech so that that's something we've, talked about here. Can you introduce yourself and talk for 3 or 4 minutes? Yeah.
TC, shout out to you. It took you about 6 months to finally have 2 minutes of.
You know what? But I honestly think the interesting thing, I really enjoyed college. I had a blast. I mean, like whenever I hear, people being like, oh, college is dead. Nobody's going to college anymore. People aren't going to go pay exorbitant amounts of fees for online schools. And then you hear this, coddling the American mind and, the degeneration of this, and you go through all this stuff, and nobody's going to go to college anymore. And I follow a bunch of different pages, for welding and fabrication on Instagram, and there's always this like, don't waste your time, go to college, get into a trade. And I think a trade is an excellent avenue to go, but I really personally enjoyed my college career and loved the fact that I got to go to Berkeley. I loved the classes I took. I mean, the interactions, the work, the reading. Like I can't say there was a single day where I didn't, obviously the work was a little overwhelming playing football, but I can't remember ever being like, I hate this, I don't want to do it. Like every day I got to go to school. Every day I got to go learn from really intelligent people and have cool conversations, and then walk up the hill, go bang weights, and then go play football. And that experience of just being able to take the classes, because I think in high school, you pretty much like, hey, everybody takes the same stuff. But when you get to go to college, you actually get to specialize in things that you're interested in. And I feel that was such a much more rich experience when I actually got to try to, study and compete in classes that I was interested in. And I remember when I was like looking at different schools, I remember when I talked to my dad about it, he's like, you should go to Berkeley. And like, I remember like, what about USC? He's like, I went there. Don't go be an SC stooge. Don't do that. Like, go someplace where you hang a degree on your wall that is forever impactful. And that was my big thing with going to Berkeley, man. I loved every ounce of it. I just, and then obviously getting to go on and play in the NFL was a great experience, but not, as I would say, as intellectually challenging. And
for some dudes,
well, I mean, but for me, I actually felt like I got dumber over the course of my NFL career. Like, I would still read, but I didn't have that constant. And I'll tell you this, like, now that I've seen like NFL players like going to college, like the one dude was in med school, I'm like, fuck.
Oh, and he had to hide it.
Dude, I should have found a law school in Philly, and I should have.
Oh, there's plenty.
I know, and it was just it was kind of like when I remember years ago, my dad was like, "You should start a website," and I was like, "Well, what am I going to put on the website?" He's like, "I don't know. Like, people have websites. You should get a website." If he had just said to me, "Hey, you know what you should do? You should post your training. You should go and just every day have a blog post your training." Like, all he would, and I would have been like, "That's a great idea. I'll do that." And we could have had that for years. And I would have loved to have had a website and a blog to chronicle all the training and the workouts and everything we did with Roth. That would have been incredible. Mm-hmm. So I think some of that stuff is just being culturally relevant and understanding it. Like, if I said to my kids today, like, "Hey, you guys should have a website, what should I put on it?" I'd be like, "What are you interested in? What books are you reading?" Just write as a diary. Talk about the things that are interesting to you and put it out there. The other big one too is not only, obviously the first impression of meeting somebody, looking the part, shaking their hand, all the other stuff. But the impression, and we see this all too often, is in your written word. So when somebody writes something and we read it, and that's their first impression of reading that author or reading somebody's blog or reading something.
Oh, or the objective on a resume or the
Yep.
mission, whatever they lead off with. Honestly, I don't even look at the rest of it.
Yep.
So,
well, it's funny, when I was going through all the resumes for the marketing director, I was just reading the cover letters.
yeah, exactly.
And if you didn't submit a cover letter, which was actually specified in you have to write a cover letter. If they didn't submit it, I just deleted them.
Yeah.
So I'm only interested in the cover letter.
That while we're on, my grandfather, this is funny. So he said, if I was ever in a hiring position, take half the resumes of the applicants and throw them out, because you never want somebody that's unlucky working for you.
That's a great piece of advice.
Yeah, something along the, like, I can't remember exactly, but just like a laughable piece.
My oldest brother, Rob, he's real successful in terms of like his business. He does insurance. So he went to law school, didn't work out for him. He didn't really enjoy it, and got into this insurance gig and has a pretty thriving book and very successful with it. But he went to a bunch of like kind of leadership and different kind of mentoring courses. And his joke is always like, and he always tells people, especially in business, like, "Are you the chicken or the pig?" And they're like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "For breakfast, you're the chicken or the pig. The chicken contributed, but the pig was committed." Mm-hmm. And so his whole thing is like, in business and life, you got to be the pig. You got to be willing to, be slaughtered for breakfast. So that idea of commitment was important. But yeah, he's been very, and my middle brother, Eddie, is a criminal defense attorney and one of the best in Southern California, and, does all that high-end murder stuff. If you guys are watching Dateline or anything and you see that last name come up, that's my older brother. So both my brothers have been very, very successful. But I can't imagine if they weren't, or we weren't successful, the amount of shit that I would have had to listen to my dad talk to us. like that piece where people are like, "Oh, I'm going to rebel." I'm like, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to try to kick ass so I don't have to listen to this.
Do you feel there was anything professionally or socially that college did not prepare you for?
I
like
went
you
to
had
college.
to learn on the streets?
I went to college with really one goal: to learn to read and write to the best of my ability. Mm. So when I went on my recruiting trip to Cal, I told them I was interested in going to law school. Bolt Hall was probably one of the best in the country, is one of the best in the country. And they set me up with the old dean of the law school, a guy named Adrian Cragen, who was a tax guy. And pretty interesting. He, as we sat down to talk, I said, hey, I'm interested in coming to Berkeley. I play football. I want to, come to law school. And he made a great point to me. He's like, your job in college is to learn to read and write to the best of your ability. And he goes, if you can do that, you'll do fine in law school. Where he goes, where people struggle is when they take something that doesn't force them into reading huge volumes of work and really being, very proficient writer. So he's the one that recommended rhetoric. And he's like, well, there's a major here at Berkeley called rhetoric. You should check it out. So I took rhetoric 1A and 1B, and I was hooked. And I was like, this is great. I get to read a bunch of books, and I get to write a bunch of papers, and everything was kind of Socratic method. We'd sit down, we'd start talking, and it was like all the classes were kind of open form discussions. And then we were given assignments. I went home, read books, and wrote papers, and it was perfect for me.
Yeah, I went back after grad school. I got the opportunity to be adjunct professor, and this is right when I got on with you for CrossFit football seminars. Mm-hmm. Adjunct professor at Marymount University, teaching like intro to personal training,
nice.
Or something along those lines. And I was sticking by the book to the curriculum, probably about halfway through, and realized like, what are you kids like? What are your majors? And there was a lot of nursing students in there, some health and fitness, health sciences deals. And find out, like, honest question, what the hell do you want to do after you get out of college? So immediately I went off curriculum. Mind you, I only lasted one semester in this position. And the rest of the course that I was leading was get a job, get an internship. Mm-hmm. This is what you want to do. I'm going to force you to get into an internship. This turns into a pass or fail course. The final was... you had to turn in 5 interviews that you acquired, and then you have to get yourself an internship or a job. So that's what it turned into. And then we did mock interviews, and just if their aim was the fitness profession, I was going to make sure they actually wanted to do that, because the grind of a personal trainer, that sucked.
Why would you go to Marymount, which is a pretty...
it's a Division III university, which in the grand scheme of things is not
it's pretty spendy, isn't it?
It's a private school, for sure.
It's an expensive private school. Mm-hmm. Are you really going to Marymount University to learn to be a personal trainer?
Well, that was part of that curriculum at that time for undergrad.
Wow. That's crazy.
But I love that job because it was perfect for grad school.
Sure.
And coaching collegiately and supplementing your income for what you want to do. But at the same time, I wanted to make sure these kids were set up, and I still receive messages. There's a few people who now turned it into their career, or that actually set them up to change their major to make sure. So even if they were a nursing student in this personal training course, okay, well, set yourself up to apply to get this job to make sure that you don't waste that Marymount money, because it ain't cheap.
Nope.
And that was the course. But then, I wasn't exactly asked back to that because, the students, they gave teacher reviews at the end of it. And I don't know. Some kids dug it, some kids didn't.
Yeah, and this is something I think all too often, especially playing football in college. How many guys did I play with who wasted their opportunity and didn't get a degree, or got pushed into some useless major that has no application outside of the real world? So I don't necessarily know if college prepares you for the rest of the world, but I don't know if that's the end game. For me, it was learning to read and write. I went to go play in the NFL, which technically wasn't a great use of my college the college degree, but it's since then after retiring, what we do here in terms of presentation and being an orator and rhetorician, whatever you want to call it, but being able to write and put all this stuff together, I think it was well schooled for that. I think for my kids, something that I've really stressed for them, which is something that I don't know if they stress as much in public school, is the ability to work in groups. So I think the idea, and if I could go back and really change how schools kind of are run, I would make everything much more project oriented and teach them to work in small groups with different pieces and leadership, and that I think that's a lot more impactful than this kind of autonomous setup and Common Core. As my kids were we were teaching math for the Common Core stuff, I was like, man, this is confusing. Why are you guys teaching it? And that's been an issue. But I really think the one thing that we did well in college is that you learn to work in teams, and also we would have a ton of groups.
Yeah, well, I mean, I took infinitely more away from my athletic career that I now apply to real world. I mean, we didn't have training, but it was more the leadership, the communication, leading up, leading down, communicating a message, creating a message with the team, and then, I mean, presenting. So as the captain, you're standing up, you're giving it the pregame rah-rah, and as awkward and awful as it was still preparing me now to know how to do that for any other team that I need to lead or stand and command a room. So that was infinitely more representative of what I needed to be in my career than my specific education.
I think the CrossFit football seminar
Yes.
was probably one of the best learning pieces for me personally. I know we went in and taught for people, but showing up and public speaking, walking into a room, being able to deliver material and, not speaking from cue cards and being able to run the flow of that. I mean, in the beginning, it was a little rough.
For us all, John.
I still think back to the first public one I gave in Cooksville, Tennessee. It was so bad that Greg Glassman actually left 15 minutes in with a laugh, like just got up and went, we'll be fine, and walked out because the first one I gave was pretty good, but I bombed so badly in my opening talk that all of CrossFit HQ had all showed up, which was hilarious because they all showed up in like black Suburbans. I thought like the FBI was coming to get us. And he sits down and all of his sycophants sit around him, and I get up and I fucking bomb. Like it was so bad. Like I felt like a comedian that was like people were walking out.
Is this thing on?
Yeah, I'm like, hey, ladies and germs, I just flew in and boy, are my arms tired, right? Like it was awful. And so he just gets up and leaves, and like with a laugh. And as soon as they all left, I was like, thank God. And
was he like doing this with his fingers?
Well, yeah, because I think he was nervous about us, doing well. And, the one thing that, a narcissistic, egotistical, narcissistic personality disorder, megalomaniac, the worst thing he fears is that somebody else is good. So he leaves with a laugh. And as soon as he left, I think I paused, the door shut, and I was like, let me start over. And I started over and was fine. And that's when I delivered the whole general specific and then specific training model that I had come up with. And
it makes great sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, I put all this stuff together, but for that first 15 minutes when he was there, it was Bombsville. And it was good because it showed me that one, we talked about genetics, geography, and opportunity being the biggest, driver for success in terms of evolution. Like, have you had the opportunity, like if I needed to get up and give this presentation or I needed to talk, how many opportunities have I got up to give this material? That first one bombed. I knew it bombed. And then from then on, I knew I had to put together a much better, experience. Once we got into coaching, it was fine. But for the most part, I'd owned a commercial gym for a little bit. We had trained people. By the time CrossFit football came around, like I was not what you would call a well-seasoned coach or, educator in any way. So then getting all of these opportunities to get out and like every weekend travel and teach till the point where you hit it and you're like, dude, I got this. Like I'm good now. But I think that was for me really, really impactful and just an incredible opportunity.
Oh, and I need to thank you for the opportunities
you
provided.
I remember you bombing.
And
I remember you walked in the back and you're like, how was it? I'm like, it was awful. And you were like, well, what are you going to do? I'm like, you're going to keep getting up there and being awful until you're not awful. So either you get used to getting booed off a stage or you fucking change your mindset and you make this great. And it was, I told you the same. I told Luke the same. I told everybody. And all of a sudden I get up there and within, not too long after, all of a sudden I'm sitting up there and I'm like, shit, these guys are better than me at this.
I did get a compliment at Deuce, spoke at Deuce Gym in Venice, California recently. And
did you drop a deuce?
No, there. No, it went well. I'm very critical. I'll just say it went well versus my personal notes. But anyway, the compliment a woman paid me afterwards. She's like, she's taller than me. She's like, you're not very tall, but you really own the room. And I was like, thank you, because just like putting me down to I guess pay the compliment.
Did you look at her and be like, Gave her like the Deuce Bigelow. You're a huge bitch.
No.
Holy shit, it's Bigfoot.
No. Oh man, that's a good rewatch we should put up there.
Dude, yeah, that's a great one.
Oh.
When he takes her like the narcoleptic chick, he takes her dancing with a helmet.
Yeah, man, it's been a long time.
Yeah, Deuce Bigelow.
What is Eddie Griffin? Is that the comedian?
Yeah, you remember that? He's like, I know Antoine. He's like, I ashed on his carpet. He made me pick it up with my anus.
Yeah.
Oh God, there's some funny ones in there.
Yeah, Rob Schneider.
Yeah, he's great.
He's a particular taste of humor.
No, to wheel this back, I think as a parent, it's the crux is put on you as an individual, as the parent, to shepherd your kids across and be able to provide them the skills for them to be successful. And just hoping that public education or, when you send them off to school is going to do that, I think you're going to be sorely disappointed. I think as a parent, you have to, have your kids see you get up, work hard, so they have to learn work ethic. Unfortunately, you can't teach anybody work ethic. You can only show them work ethic, and then they take to it. So the idea of like instilling a work ethic, I think that's a hard one. I think what they have to do is they have to see you as the individual, be a hard worker, and then they have to see that. Like, it's real hard to talk about creating and instilling work ethic as I'm sitting on the couch drinking beer all Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, this is a big fan of the garage gym revolution now.
Yeah.
You get actual opportunity to show and create a great relationship with fitness and weightlifting for your kids, and that's all they would know.
And then they I talk to them all the time when we're cooking and food and where it's sourced from and how it's made, why we eat this way, and being able to just educate them at every opportunity. And then the big thing is the manners thing. Like, oh my God, like I didn't realize that.
Kids' birthday parties? You see some?
Like, dude, we had Cashie's 5th birthday, and 2 of the kids, like, it was pretty funny. We had it at this place called High Five, which has like video games and like laser tag and stuff. And 2 of the parents literally just pulled up, opened the door, like pushed the kid out and just drove away. And then the other parents pulled up, pushed the kid out, parked, and then they just walked to the bar and just like I'm over there, and these kids are like, basically they had a huge whack-a-mole thing. The kid jumped up on top of it and was stomping on the whack-a-mole. I went over there and was like, come here. I was like, dude, if you break that thing, I'm going to break you. And I grabbed him by the arm, and I was like looking around. I'm like, where are his parents? His parents are in there having drinks, and they were probably like, you deal with this kid. So, but like Cash is in sports, and like I see the way the parents and the kids act. Actually, I volunteered to be an assistant coach for his T-ball.
Oh, baseball,
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah, for his T-ball, and for that. So when Jamie goes to basketball, they have like she goes to Hill Country Indoor, and so they have like professional coaches, and like she got a pretty decent coach. And it was funny because like I always talk to him, and he was like, hey, do you want to sit on the bench? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I was over there, and it was pretty funny as I'm like over there like coaching the girls up. I'm like, you got to relax, take your shots, work your fundamentals. And I realized, I was like, you know what, like this would be fun. So I want to go out and help with T-ball. And I think what I'm nervous about, and I remember my brother said, he's like, hey, you should volunteer because you actually understand a little bit of like the sports, like, sports life and the pathway and how you've done it. And a lot of parents don't. And so there's a lot of angry parents and a lot of parents that are trying to live vicariously through the kids. And if you don't get out there, you're going to end up with some a-hole.
Oh, yeah.
So that's kind of why I was like, you know what? I can do it on Saturday mornings.
Yeah, I just spoke with Zach Evanesh on that specific topic. And part of his interview process, because his son is a baseball player versus a wrestler, and he's not too happy about it, but kid's baseball guy, he asked the parent or the coach if their kid is on the team. And one of his rules, he doesn't allow his son to play on the team if there's also the coach's son because of past experiences.
Yeah, that's a great one.
And he's, no. And then you realize that coach is in it for coaching.
The other one, I think with having daughters, this is an interesting one. Like I think we think all too often with our sons in terms of like manners, respect, shake a hand. But I do the same thing with my daughters. I'm like, I've shown them like, hey, this is how you shake somebody's hand. You look them in the eye, because unfortunately they're going to go out into the business world, and they need to be treated as equals. And I think a big part of that is Like, this is how it's done. This is the custom. This is, this is how we just do things. So I think a big part of that is being able to provide not only respect, but also understand, like, hey, like, this is not how you act. This is how you act, and understanding those boundaries. And unfortunately, when they're kids, they kind of bounce back and forth. And I think the parents have to be the bumpers, hey, like, this is a consistent message between the, mom and dad. So I just, and I'm sure every generation has said this. I talked to my mom the other day about this, and she's like, I don't know what, like, what does this world look like in 50 years? It's going to look much different. And I'm like, yeah, probably much more different in 50 years than what the world looked like 50 years ago.
Right.
But like, think about the advancements with everything. I mean, my mom's 80, and she's like, when I was 40 years ago, like, what did that look like? And I'm like, it's going to be dramatically different. When I'm 80, it's going to look way different. So I think it's all exciting. But I also think that every generation thinks every other generation is soft, or every other generation's crazy. And that's just probably hindsight. But I think as long as, one, as a parent, your kids grow up knowing you love them. Like, that's something I tell my daughters all the time. Remember, Daddy loves you. Like, I remember reading a book years ago that said if a woman grows up without her father's love, she'll go out and search for it over and over again. And I remember, like, somebody sent me, like, when I got sent a book when I was having twins, or somebody found out I was having twin girls, and it was like, fatherly advice, and it was like, tell your daughters you love them every day, because if you don't and they have a doubt, they'll go out and search for it. And so that was impactful for me. But also, like, not treating them like little girls. Like, hey, you guys are, you're 9 years old. You need to, learn to do this and this. These are things that everybody does. This isn't just a girl task or a boy task. So, and then just taking them around. Like, whenever we have somewhere to go, I'm like, get in the car. Like, hey, like, let's take a drive. Come with me. Like, we'll go to Tractor Supply, and I'm like, I make them pick up. They have like 40 and 50 pound bags of corn we got to get for the deer. Mm-hmm. So I like make them, they're like, okay, grab the bag, and then watching them try to wrestle in the cart is pretty funny. I should film some video of that. But I just think, like, these are all things that, your kids have an opportunity to be around you. These are the things you teach opposed from them, sitting there watching, YouTube videos of Sniper Wolf.
Well, how important is teaching them two things? One, how to tell a joke, and two, how to take a joke.
That has been something that we have worked on for years. The ability to not only tell a joke. So at dinner, I think I've told you this, the girls tell jokes. So I got them a joke book. And then if they find a joke, they can tell it during dinner. And it's pretty interesting. Like, the idea of like big spoon, little dish. Like, can you take a joke? Can you take some razzing? Can you tell a joke? Can you wait on the delivery? And I'll tell you, my daughter Jameson is actually really funny.
Oh, I'm well aware.
Oh, she's got a funny sense of humor, and she's smart, which contributes to this stuff. Because I always tell her, I'm like, hey, I told her the other day, I'm like, we got to get you jiu-jitsu, and you got to learn how to fight. And she's like, why? I'm like, because somebody's going to punch you in your face, and you're not going to know what to do. And so she's funny, and she's tall. And so I know she gives these boys fucking headaches and just talks shit to them all the time, which is good. And she's sharp. Killy, on the other hand, she cracks herself up. Like, she starts telling a joke and she usually laughs before the punchline. But she's not as good. Like, she's not as water off the duck's back as Jamie is.
Well, that's yin and yang. Great pair.
Yeah.
Great team.
And then Cassie just tells awful jokes.
Now.
Oh my God, they're so bad. He would say, what did he tell me the other day? He's like, why did the toilet go to the toilet party? And I was like, why? It's like, because they wanted to see it flush. I was like, I appreciate that, but that makes absolutely no sense.
There's a joke in there.
He thinks if toilet is in the joke, it's funny. And if flush is in there, it's hysterical. And he cracks himself up.
Yeah, I get it.
Humor. So no, it's, I think one, prepare your kids from the day you're not there. When they go out into this world, make sure that they have a skill set where other parents don't look and think their parents must be assholes. Teach them to have a good sense of humor, how to take a joke, how to give a joke. Teach them to be, kind and, not to be, mean-spirited. Big thing, like I talked about the girls all the time. I'm like, one, don't be a bully. And if you see somebody getting bullied, like, go bully the bully. That's a big one for us. And for the most part, is like don't ever, like you don't want anybody like being like growing up. See how I articulate this? Growing up, being lazy was like the worst thing. Like I remember my mom and my dad being like, "We don't raise lazy kids. Get your fucking asses up." And like it'd be like 7:00 and my dad's banging on our window, "Get your fucking lazy asses up." And we'd be out there washing cars on a Saturday, like 7 a.m. And now it's like my kids are dead at 7 a.m. I'm like, I'll let them sleep. But like that stuff of like, don't be lazy, be helpful, be the first one to act. Like, don't be helpless. That's another one for the daughters, for my girls. Like there is no damsel in distress. Don't be helpless. Nobody's coming to save you. You have to save yourself. And for the most part, like read, be educated. I mean,
and
just
it's
all
not
these
only
pieces.
you're telling these kids this. You and Kate are doing a great job representing models.
Yeah. Well, my wife constantly reminds him. She's like, I got two masters in an MBA. So she reminds them. The kids are like, I don't know what the hell that is. But yeah. And what's funny is I don't even think they necessarily know what I do. Like I know that they watch YouTube and they've seen me on YouTube.
Oh yeah, Jamie has been burning me and my podcast jokes for a long time.
She's like, Tex, you're not very funny.
Yeah.
She
calls me Daisy. Daisy, you're not funny. Your
you're
jokes
like,
are not funny.
You're like, when you get bigger, I'm going to punch you in your throat. No, I mean, she's a pretty good basketball player. We got to work the shot, so we got to start busting ass on that. But yeah, I mean, I think being a parent is extremely, it's rewarding. I don't think it's for everybody. Like I'm not one of those people where it's like, oh, everybody should have kids. No, I don't think everybody should have kids. I think like if you do have kids and you have to invest a lot of time in them, like it's not something where I'm kind of lukewarm about it, but I think it's been impactful and it's been rewarding for me to be able to like, deal with my kids and then see how I was raised and then realize like, okay, here were the mistakes. Here's this, like I'm not going to perpetuate it. I'm going to try to do better. And I think it's been a really good growth, but also I waited until I was in my early 30s to have kids. I think if I'd had kids in my early 20s, I don't think I would have been a very good father, just because I think playing the NFL is extremely selfish.
Well, I mean, it's peak performance. It's almost got to be.
Well, so I mean, but a lot of guys I played with were probably good parents and were able to do it. For me, I just fucking like it was selfish, and I was totally fine to be it. And then all of a sudden, I retired and realized like, okay, like because I'll tell you this, being a selfish parent is not like those two words probably don't go well together. And I think if you're a selfish person, I think it's better to not have kids. Because I'll tell you, it's tough being selfish with kids just because they just a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. Like there's not a lot of time for you to nurture your inner child.
Unless you can change your mindset. All right.
Well, cool.
I think we
smashed it.
I won't say asked and answered because we didn't really ask and answer a question. But
well, we did have a question, but it was more about how to get your kid to sleep when he's teething, and I think we took that in a different direction. You could always go with, for that guy listening, you could always just go with the age-old one of just rubbing some Jack Daniels on their gums. That one seems to work pretty good. And then we also had a bunch of like ice pops that they used to like cold things that freeze that they used to suck on. But for the most part, teething. Like everybody's like, oh, when your baby comes and you sleep through the night. Oh, that's great. No, your baby sleeps at night when its stomach gets big enough to hold enough food. Teething is a whole different animal. And they don't talk about that.
Good luck.
Good job. Well, guys, thanks for joining us on another episode of Power Athlete Radio. I'm John. I'm here with Mr. McQuilkin, and like always, we are answering questions via the hotline. Once again, 929-464-464.
0.
929-ING-ING.
0.
You got it. Bye. Bye.